Elon Musk tweeted the slide deck from an all-hands talk he gave to SpaceX employees last week. Let's break it down. So the video had no sound, but we got to see the slides that were used in Elon Musk's presentation. So record-breaking launch cadence, averaging a launch per week. If we look at the summary of SpaceX launches from Wikipedia, there have been 22 Falcon 9 launches thus far in 2022, and as of June 5th, we're actually in the 22nd week of the year, or 42% of the way through the year. That averages out to just about one SpaceX launch per week. And that brings their total to 131 launches since the last failure 6 years ago, which was, of course, Amos 6, which didn't even launch. It exploded on the pad. Now, according to the chart, there are 32 more planned commercial and government launches this year, and 4 more planned Starlink launches. The fastest booster turnaround, that would be the Falcon 9 booster B-1062, which launched the Axiom 1 crew to the ISS on April 8th, and then launched a batch of Starlink satellites on April 29th, just 21 days later. A 160 successful launches. If we look at the chart again, let's see. SpaceX has only had 3 missions that were not entirely successful. In 2016, Amos 6 blew up on the pad during propellant loading for a routine test. In 2015, an overpressurization event in the upper stage LOX tank caused the vehicle to break up at T plus 150 seconds. On board was the CRS-7 cargo Dragon bound for the ISS, which included the first international docking adapter that would allow commercial crew vehicles to dock to the space station. Dragon actually survived the blast, but its software didn't yet include parachute deployments during launch contingencies. So it splashed down at speed and was thereby damaged. And then in 2012, during CRS-1, SpaceX's first ISS cargo mission, there was a secondary payload called Orbcomm OG-2. During the launch, one of the first stage's 9 Merlin engines shut down, and the other 8 engines automatically picked up the slack. This burned more fuel than expected, which reduced the probability that SpaceX could successfully deliver the Orbcomm satellite to its target orbit above the space station from more than 99% to about 95%. As the owner of the primary payload, CRS-1, NASA exercised its right to decline a reignition of the second stage engine. CRS-1 made it to the ISS just fine, but without the extra boost from the second stage, SpaceX was unable to deliver the Orbcomm satellite into a stable orbit, and it burned up within 4 days of launch. Up to 4 Falcon Heavy missions in 2022. Those would be the Psyche asteroid mission on September 20th, Viasat-3 just 9 days later, USSF-52 on October 31st, and USSF-67 in November. Thus far, there have only been 3 Falcon Heavy launches. Starman in Elon Musk's Tesla Roadster in 2018, then Arabsat-6A and the Air Force's STP-2 in 2019. After that, nothing for 3 years. It'll be good to see Falcon Heavy launch and land again. Maybe I'll even head down to Florida and see it for myself. '10th anniversary of the first Dragon flight to the space station. Remember that CRS-1 mission I just talked about that was a partial failure because it couldn't deliver the Orbcomm satellite? Well, that was also the first cargo Dragon flight to the ISS. There were 20 Dragon 1 cargo missions from 2012 to 2020, one of which failed, as I mentioned earlier, the CRS-7. Since 2020, there have been 5 5 Dragon 2 cargo missions. Dragon 2 is the cargo variant of the same vehicle as Crew Dragon. First all-civilian crew to the space station. Axiom 1 launched back in April with 4 civilian crew members, including retired astronaut Michael Lopez Alegria, and stayed on the station for 15.5 days, almost twice as long as originally planned, due primarily to uncooperative weather. Now, it wasn't SpaceX's first all-civilian mission. That would have been Inspiration 4, which launched in late last year, late 2021, I think it was September. The first planned spacewalk with Dragon. Now we're looking to the future. So this is planned for, quote, no earlier than the 4th quarter of 2022, unquote. And this will take place during the Polaris Dawn mission, which will carry 4 more civilian astronauts into the highest crewed Earth orbit ever flown, an elliptical orbit reaching more than 800 kilometers, with the spacewalk to be conducted at 500 kilometers up, slightly below where the Hubble Space Telescope orbits. The crew will include Jared Isaacman, who commanded the Inspiration 4 mission last year. Interestingly, the goals of Polaris Dawn were essentially borrowed from Space Adventures, the company that has facilitated 7 civilian flights to the space station on Russian Soyuz spacecraft going all the way back to 2001. Space Adventures had planned for such a mission to launch in 2022 on Crew Dragon, but back in October 2021, they announced that the contract had expired and would not be executed. So essentially the mission was rebranded and is now flying as Polaris Dawn with Jared Isaacman at the helm. Third anniversary of version 0.9 launch of Starlink. So in the past 3 years, SpaceX has launched 2,653 Starlink satellites. All but about 300 of those are still working. The largest 2 sources for lost Starlink satellites were the deliberate deorbiting of all 60 satellites from the first launch, when they were in their testing phase, and the geomagnetic storm last February 3rd that prevented 38 of the 49 Starlink satellites from reaching their target orbit. If you recall, there was a solar storm that puffed up the Earth's atmosphere. The satellites were put into a safe mode where their antennas were retracted, and they were basically oriented edge on into their orbital path, and to minimize their cross section. And because of that orientation, by the time they were able to emerge from that safe mode, they were no longer able to boost themselves into a safe orbit, and they thereby deorbited over various parts of the world. Nearly 500,000 Starlink users and counting in 32 countries and 9 languages. I was actually one of them for a few months. I beta tested Starlink until this past January, when I canceled my subscription primarily due to the cost. I already have Google Fiber gigabit landline internet service, and so with the greatly reduced channel revenue due to the inscrutable YouTube algorithm, Starlink was putting me in the red. So now Dishy sits behind me, looking round and pretty, which, let me go full screen. There it is. See if I can point backwards and reversed. There we go. There's Dishy. I still haven't gotten the hang of the reverse pointing thing. It confuses me every time. All right, so moving along. Internet by land, air, and sea. Now, of course, Starlink supports roaming. You can use the dishes outside of your home area, and they have a service specifically for RVs, which is, I think, $30 or $40 more per month. And I'm not sure why that is. I wonder if they have or will disable the roaming capability of the original Starlink dishes, or the original Starlink service, the home Starlink service. Now that they have the RV service rolled out, I'm not sure, because I can no longer test it anymore. I'm no longer a subscriber. But in addition to that, they also plan to make Starlink internet available on planes and boats that are in motion. Obviously, planes are going to be in motion, since they can't hover. While experimenters have successfully used Starlink from moving vehicles, they're supposed to be used from a fixed location, like at your house. 15,000 Starlinks delivered to Ukraine. So this provided a communications lifeline to many Ukrainians whose infrastructure and services were disrupted by the Russian invasion. It also led to deliberate signal jamming by Russian forces, which SpaceX had to take steps to counteract. Version 2.0 Starlink satellite production. The next generation Starlink satellites will be much larger than the current version, with significantly more throughput capacity. Here we see, oh yes, watch this little animation. Here we see the Starship PEZ dispenser deploying pairs of Starlink satellites, 2 at a time. And you see those Starlinks occupy the full width of the Starship payload bay, which is quite large. Elon actually, in response to somebody mentioning that it looked like a PEZ dispenser, Elon said maybe they should make a Starlink model PEZ dispenser. I think that would be completely appropriate. All right. Starship 24, booster number 7, and Raptor 2.0. Recall that Elon's big speech a couple of months ago featured Booster 4 and Starship 20 with a modified booster height, or a revised booster height of 69 meters. Oh, Elon. Starship orbital test flight. This has been planned and anticipated for a long time, but SpaceX has been waiting for the FAA's repeatedly delayed programmatic environmental assessment of the Starbase launch site. As for an exact date for the orbital test flight, we'll have to wait and see. It was supposed to maybe launch in May. Obviously, that didn't happen due to additional delays from the FAA. So I think everything is waiting on the FAA. And, once we get a firm date on the test flight, I will have coverage for you here on Raw Space of that flight. The Factory of the Future at Starbase. So with Cybertrucks. So that title reminds me of an exhibit you'd see at a 1960s World's Fair. But yeah, the SpaceX has big plans for Starship production both in Texas and in Florida. Here we have the Factory of the Future at the Cape. SpaceX has long had plans to develop facilities at their Roberts Road location, which we can see a map of here. So here's the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral site, and right here is SpaceX operations area, which is their Roberts Road location. So this, roughly this rectangle that you see here is what SpaceX plans to develop. This is located about 2 kilometers from the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex and a 10-kilometer drive from Launch Complex 39A. Now, this road you see next to the SpaceX Roberts Road location, this is not the crawler way, this is a highway. Now, this is, what is it? It's the Kennedy Parkway. The crawler way goes from the Kennedy Space Center. It surrounds the vehicle assembly building, and it extends out to the launch complexes 39A and B. It's an interesting little squiggle there. Anyway, I love looking at maps, pardon me. There's another squiggle. Is that natural? What is that? Is it a... That's weird. That is not natural. I don't think. In any case, maybe somebody familiar with Kennedy Space Center can explain what those squiggles are. I presume they don't have off-road dirt track racing at Kennedy Space Center. Okay, moving on. Making life multiplanetary. Now, it looks like we're seeing a habitat on Mars at the edge of the Valles Marineris canyon with the blue sunset, which is how the sun appears when it sets on Mars, and comets, or perhaps incoming starships making deliveries. That's always been the stated goal of SpaceX, although they and we still have a long, long road before we can reach that point.